Hello, dear audience. Welcome back to our programs in the Association Sovereignty, the unique think tank in the West who is sovereign and for multipolarism in the world. Today we have a floor for five of our colleagues. We are bringing more and more talents from the all around the world to this space to bring ideas, to bring the best of us for a better world. In the case of today, the issue will be the next, will be the following. What will happen in Europe if we can bring peace again in our continent? In this case, I will give floor to our colleagues for a 5-7 speech. So feel free, of course, to say anything you want, anything you consider, because this is free space for freedom of speech, for talking about, especially in the case of our European colleagues, the future of Europe. What will happen in Europe? So, please, Mr. Alexander Markovics, the floor is yours. And remember that you can visit our site. In the down part is our website and our X account. Anyway, I will put in the description of the video. Mr. Markovics, please, you are the first.
Yeah, dear Dr. Refoyo, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak here. So, of course, right now we still have this unfortunate conflict between the West and Russia over Ukraine. Of course, we know that this escalation is currently at the moment kept alive by various Western elites. But as we are speaking right now, we can see the first cracks inside this Western alliance for war. And with these first peace talks or first talks in general about the future understanding between Russia and the West, just starting right now, we can start to imagine a better future. And of course, for Europe, a better future in this direction would mean cooperation with Russia. Of course, we could argue that right now there's a kind of race taking place between the United States and Europe for the very fact who could be the first to make peace with Russia and again come to a civilized understanding with Moscow. And especially for us Europeans, this question is very important since the European economy is dependent on energy from Russia, resources from Russia, and therefore it poses the question, how could we start trading again with Russia and especially trading for important resources? Because as we know from the events of the beginning of 2026, the United States are back into the piracy business again and basically started, or at least tried to take over a whole country with Venezuela. They started to basically steal Russian and Venezuelan tankers all around the world on high seas. So, of course, transporting resources via the sea is quite dangerous at the moment. And as we have seen with the example of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, these trading routes could simply be sabotaged by the United States and its vessels. So for a sovereign Europe, there is exactly one big alternative for all that, and it's called the North Sea route, which is not that well known right now at the moment, at least in Europe, but it becomes more and more important for countries like India and China, who are already sovereign and not dependent on any other power. And therefore, it would also be wise for Europe to further use the trade via this trade route, simply because the North Sea route is not possible to be put under blockade by the United States at the very moment. The reason for that is quite simple, because all the ports running around the North Sea route are actually controlled by Russia and are part of Russian territory. So we have a huge route going from Murmansk in the Pacific Ocean, right? Also, excuse me, from Vladivostok in the Pacific Ocean, right to Murmansk in the Arctic Sea. And from Murmansk on, it would be possible to transport important resources like oil, like coal, and other things to St. Petersburg, and from there on to ports in Poland and Germany. This would be basically a no-brainer for a future European-Russian cooperation, since it would be free from the possibility of American blockade. Of course, it presupposes that states like Poland and Germany think about a cooperation with Russia again, and it would be insofar very good for us, since a sovereign Europe could actually guarantee the security of this very trade route from the Baltic Sea, and therefore it wouldn't be subject to US piracy or blockade. So therefore, I think we have to focus on this trade route in terms of future European Russian relations, and not only regarding that, but also future European Eurasian relations with great sovereign spaces like India and China, for example, since also these countries are very important for a future European economic and trade policy, since Europe itself has no autarky, but in cooperation with Russia, China, and India, we can achieve such an autarky. And also, if we think about Iran, of course, it would be also possible to further strengthen the cooperation with Iran itself in order to lead to a further integration of the so-called land power on our globe against, of course, the sea power, which would have no benefit from this trade between the sovereign land civilization among each other, and would be then further isolated should the United States continue its current course of piracy and isolating and sanctioning other sovereign civilizations.
Sorry. Thanks a lot, Mr. Markovic, and we send you a great salute you to Austria, this very crucial Central European country. But now we go to South America, and we give floor to Mr. Rafael Machado. Welcome, benvido, obrigado for your assistance.
Thank you very much, Enrique, and my greetings to the other participants here and also to our audience. I'm going to speak a bit, that's going to be mostly about the agricultural sector and how it has been affected, and some considerations regarding this specific sector of the economy, and of the European, Ukrainian, Russian relations. I'm going to begin, as a matter of fact, by saying that usually we treat Europe as a continent in itself, though many geopoliticians consider it to be basically part of the same continent, of the same geopolitical organism as Russia. In this sense, of course, it can only make sense to try to build a strategy to achieve peace, a reasonable peace in Ukraine, instead of prolonging conflict that, of course, can only bring and has only brought negative results, negative consequences to the European countries. We could talk, for example, about the influx of refugees, and considering the political dimension of these specific Ukrainian refugee crisis, this could also affect, for example, foreign policy in European countries who have been receiving these refugees. But I'd say that one of the most affected sectors in European countries is the agricultural sector. Of course, it also affects, it brings some consequences to South America. We need only to take a look at the European Union Mercosur trade agreement, who is or is not going to be put into practice. It's kind of like in a Schrödinger situation. But what we have seen since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine is mostly that because of the waiving of tariffs and, for example, some subsidized initiatives, Ukrainian agricultural products have been basically overflowing, in European markets, even though the original intention of these investments into agribusiness sector in Ukraine was to use Europe as a kind of export lane to the world because of the situation with the Black Sea ports. As a matter of fact, a big part of these products have been staying in European countries, and they, of course, are cheaper than the products of the agribusiness sector in Poland, in France, in most other countries of Europe, because of many reasons. As a matter of fact, one of them is the fact that European countries have been subjected to a kind of green agenda, a very doubtful green agenda, which imposes a lot of costs over agricultural businesses. For example, they need to leave a reasonable part of their land as fallow land. They have a lot of limitations regarding the use of chemical products during all the stages of the business. But on the other hand, the Ukrainian farms, which are also usually much bigger, they don't suffer the same regulations. They have less labor regulations than the agricultural sector in European countries. They have less regulations regarding the cutting of trees, regarding how to use the land, and therefore their products are much cheaper. And we see the problem with that when it is compounded with the fact that now European countries don't have access to cheap Russian gas, which also affects the agribusiness sector in Europe, even if sometimes marginally, in the sense that, for example, for transportation, this is something that is affected by the lack of cheap Russian energy, etc. But of course, this also affects the agricultural sector in European countries. So one of the consequences of that is the fact that many European farms have been closed during the last 4 years. This is something that was already happening before, but it has become endemic since the beginning of the European conflict. There's also another problem with the fact that nowadays European farms don't have such easy access to fertilizers. They used to consume Russian fertilizers, but now they need to either produce fertilizers inside Europe, and they didn't have, they weren't producing enough fertilizers domestically, or to import it from Canada, for example, and some other countries. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians, they do have access to cheap fertilizers because it is also subsidized by, for example, the FAO from the United States and from other initiatives who have been sending a lot of money to Ukraine. As I was saying, many European farms have been closing. We have also seen that European farmers have been trying to mobilize politically against that. And these also will have political consequences because, of course, we see that, for example, in countries like France and some other countries, the agricultural sector, they form a part of the social basis of the populist parties, in the sense that what is felt is that if the current European elites can't solve this problem, maybe new European elites could solve this kind of problem. Of course, this could only be solved with a kind of understanding with Russia as their neighbor and as part of the same continent as the European countries. Of course, from a South American perspective, this would be interesting also in the sense that maybe from our side and from the European side, we could get to an understanding of rejecting the European Union Mercosur trade agreement, which even though it would be reasonably good for our agricultural sector, it would be terrible for our industrial sector. Meanwhile, it would also, of course, be terrible for the European agricultural sector, which is already pretty much damaged because of the green agenda and the Ukrainian situation. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Mr. Rafael. And now we go to Italy because we have the speech of Mr. Simone Monticchio. Grazie mille for your assistance, and now the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, my dear colleagues. So I would like to kick off. I would like to start about the situation of US, like Trump administration. Why? Because at the end, European Union, even if it's open now, like the old elite, the globalists, that they found their place in Europe. Apparently, they are fighting against the Trump administration. Still, the situation as the U.S. administration is the main stake player on international arena. Why? Why Trump would like to occupy Greenland, and why the Trump administration is trying to find an accommodation with the Russian administration about on Ukrainian war, but US is still it's in a position of gain. So what does it mean? So if the conflict is gonna be ended or have to end, and the US administration they will start with to find an agreement with the Russian administration to exploit natural resources of Ukraine, the Trump administration is going to gain. If not, I remember that the US administration is still selling today weapons to the European countries throughout the NATO, and also is selling American gas, oil to Europe. The actual situation of US, it's like basically American administration or American economy is collapsing, is going down. American public debts today amounts to $38 trillion with an annual payment of $650 million of interest. It's about roughly 124% of country's GDP. So what needs US? It needs US to expand to also, I remember China, I think months ago, if I don't remember, banned the export of raw material to US. So US need first to occupy new land because desperate need energy. Is the reason because the coup d'etat, the intervention absolutely resolved that was displaced in Venezuela, is the reason because he tried to buy or incorporate or occupy Greenland as a new territory. And also with the reason because they tried under track to still supply intelligence and weapons to the Kiev government. So the position of US and Israel is they try to open new market to occupy the focal checkpoint. For example, we saw in Panama also we have a struggle against China, and the situation of course in Iran, where US plays with its strict ally that in that region, that is Israel. Or better, if another way around, another interpretation is the Israel lobby, which pushes Washington to an open confrontation with the Iranian Islamic Republic. So we see like in order to avoid the economic collapse, the crumble of the empire of the dollar, the United States and its ally, they need to occupy specific states that are riches with the natural resources, raw material. Groenland also it's important. Why? Because it contains the 8% of the water, and one of the priority in the new Pentagon, in the new strategy of the American Ministry of War, in the new strategic documents of the Pentagon, is the use of AI, artificial intelligence, applies also inside the military. For instance, the Groenland, in Groenland we have the 80% of the water that it's crucial to cold the supercomputer, mega computer that are used in by the intelligence, the artificial intelligence. And I remember that all the software of the AI are produced in the Silicon Valley. All the owners of the Silicon Valley are prompt and convict Zionism. So we have as a road, and this is of course my humble interpretation, we have an open war. On one side we have the American Zionists against the rest of the world, because it's crucial for US to occupy, as I told before, strategic resources. Let's say about the situation of in the European Union. What they would like to do, the Americans, they would like to, and it's written in the strategic documents, withdraw from Europe and downsizing the number of soldiers of the American bases in Europe, and let push the European to an open confrontation, to struggle against Russia. That it's almost impossible to do that. Why? Because like European Union doesn't own an own army. The army of the European Union is NATO, where all the European Union states are vassals of United States. I remember that the General Commander-in-Chief, after the creation of NATO in 1949, it was always, and it's still, an American General Commander-in-Chief. So the European, they don't have the army, they don't have the possibility to arrive to an open confrontation against Russia. Almost as if we get deep in details and we analyze, it's gonna be funny for some of you, but the most stable government now in this moment in Europe is the Italian one. I'm not fan of Giorgia Meloni for different reasons. She's not a patriot. She's a member of Aspen Institute. She took the power with the fake promises to erase sanction against Russia and stop massive illegal immigration to Italy, but she didn't nothing. But why is the most stable? If we have a panorama, if we analyze the position of the French government or the English government, Macron in less than 1 year it will finish his mandate, and there is a huge crisis of its popularity. Less than 20% of French population, they are in favor of Mr. Macron. Same for Merz in Germany, and we have like Stramer also. It's like a consensus. The last poll showed the consensus around 15-16%. And 2 days ago, one of the closest allies of Mr. Starmer, it was the ambassador the English ambassador in US, Mr. Manderson. It was also linked to Epstein files. So there's a huge scandal now in United Kingdom. How it will be decided, the end of the war in Ukraine, it's quite difficult, but I guess it's gonna be like on the field, on the battleground. If we saw the last advance of the Russian army, we said that the Russian army, it's almost seized the most important cities, the last bastion of Ukrainian defense in Donbass. Now we have like the strategic city of Liman that the Russian army they squeeze on, and we have also Konstantinivka that I think they will be captured or occupied by the Russian troops in less than 1 month, and they are arriving close to the Kramatorsk. So if they can cut the logistic of the Ukrainian army. Now in the last weeks, why always there is open dialogue and negotiation between Russian and American. The Russian army, they are advancing quite faster, especially in Zaporizhzhia region. 2 days ago, I think they are rapidly encircling the last big city. It's Orkov, is the last one. After Orkov, we have the capital, Zaporizhia. If we will see, we are witnessing, or we will witness the capitulation of Zaporizhia, basically the Russian they will occupy all the Donbass. One of the first goal, the first strategic goal of the special operation will be fulfilled. The other, why this peace cannot be reached now? Why? Because neither the Ukrainian and his European allies, neither the Russian, they are interested to sign a ceasefire or peace treaty with the ongoing condition. Which are the main problems? The main problem is the repression against the Orthodox Church in Ukraine and the repression against the Russian minorities. But the main question is the Ukrainian not aligned neutral stage. So the Ukraine must be neutral, and with the actual leadership, with Mr. Zelensky, that I remember for the audience, is a dictator. It's a dictator because it was not be elected again. At the last election, he decided to use the special law, emergency law, during the wartime. In this situation, it's quite impossible to reach a peaceful agreement. Why? Because also President Putin they doesn't recognize as a legitimate president Mr. Zelensky. So all the main issues are unsolved. There are the main news in this situation is the meeting that was happened yesterday or a couple of days ago between Mr. Dmitriev, that is the chief negotiator of the Russian, and not only with Witkoff, but with Besset. Who is Besset? Besset is the key figure inside the Trump administration. This because he's the official U.S. Treasury Secretary. Is the person in charge of take all the most important decision on economic sphere. So is the guy that can delete the economic sanction against the Russian Federation. What can be the easy way out? The Russian can accept the offer of the Trump administration to get inside the border of peace in Gaza and using the 1 million, about roughly $1 million of dollar of the Russian asset freezed in the US and Europe to pay the fee, the membership inside the board of peace in Gaza. Because I remember that 1/3 or 1/4 roughly of Israeli population, they have Russian roots. So there they can start a new dialogue between the American and the Russian. It's quite iconic. Then they start to have an agreement indirectly, not on Ukraine, but they will pass through Gaza to Palestine to find a further agreement on Ukraine. Only between a bilateral conversation between the Americans and the Russian. About the European, I don't think so, and I don't find any guy, and I remember there is not any leader that today can sign any type of agreement with or ceasefire better with the Russian. Not, of course, Macron, that was the last president that he talked with Mr. Putin, the 7th February of 2022, not Mr. Hammer, not the German Chancellor. Maybe there can be some attempt by Giorgia Meloni, because inside the Italian government, we still have a lot of deputies that they are pro-Russian, or they are in favor of an appeasement or a reconciliation with the Russian government. And I close my intervention. I totally agree with my colleagues from Brazil, Rafael, when he said about the importance of the agriculture sector. For me, as an expert of European law, it's one of the main obstacle to the membership any possible Ukrainian membership inside the European Union, because countries like, for example, Poland and Hungary and the Baltic state that I remember they get a huge amount of European Union fund and aids. They will lose this privilege. in case of new incorporation of Ukraine, in case Ukraine should become a new member of the European Union. So I think that Slovakia, Hungary, or the Baltic state, or Poland, they will vote against the incorporation of the Ukraine. Of course, we saw the result of the Ukrainian massive arrival of Ukrainian refugees, for example, in Poland. They hardly affected the Polish economy. So that is my overview, my personal point of view on this issue about the situation of Europe and the three stakeholders, United States, Europe, and Russia on Ukrainian conflict. I give the floor to my colleagues. Thanks a lot for the attention.
Thanks a lot, Simone. Thanks a lot for your appreciation. And let's jump from the south to the middle Europe, to Germany. Please, Mr. Konstantin, the floor is yours. And Dankeschön for your assistance.
Oh, bitte schön. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here at this conference. I would like to speak a bit about the topic of sovereignty, because my colleagues discussed the situation in Europe right now regarding the conflict in Ukraine. And well, the argument is that the Europeans basically should hurry up and they should end the conflict and find some settlement with Russia before the Americans do it by themselves with Russia and leave the Europeans out, because then the Americans will basically dictate terms to the Europeans. So I suppose my colleagues think they should be prevented, and the Europeans somehow should find a rapprochement with Russia, basically make peace with Russia. Well, I think there are several problems with this line of thought. The first one is, as I said, the question of sovereignty. Like, is Western Europe or the European Union even a pole in the multipolar world? I would say it is not a pole. It is definitely a civilization, but it's not a proper state, because according to my definition of multipolarity, to be a pole in the multipolar world, you have to be a civilization state, sort of like an empire. So you have to have a sort of unified people that share certain traditions and a certain culture, but is also united in a political entity, a sovereign political entity. I don't think that's the case with the European Union, because it is not truly sovereign, especially if you look at Germany, which is the economic powerhouse of the European Union. I mean, Germany has been occupied since 1945, and it is still occupied today by the United States. I mean, there are tens of thousands of US troops stationed on German soil. There are dozens of American military bases on German soil, and there are even American nuclear weapons on German soil that are not controlled by the Europeans, but that are controlled exclusively by the Americans. So Germany is not a sovereign entity or a sovereign state at all. So if Germany is not sovereign, if Germany is an occupied country, how can Germany, being the most powerful player in the European Union, contribute to making Europe independent from the United States? I don't think it's possible. I think the only semi-sovereign state in the European Union is probably France, because France has nuclear weapons, is the only state in the European Union that has its own nuclear weapons. And I think maybe unilaterally France could possibly come to some agreement with Russia and benefit from it. But I think the European Union as a whole will not be able to do it, simply because they're too dependent on the United States. As my other colleague mentioned earlier, like the European Union doesn't have its own military, so it would not even be able to defend itself in case of an attack by another player. I mean, this was pretty obvious with the whole Greenland fiasco, when Donald Trump threatened to just take Greenland, basically. Well, the European Union, they protested, of course, but that's all they did. And they never play the game of tit for tat. Like when Trump threatens China with tariffs, China immediately responds tit for tat, Yes, but the European Union doesn't do it. I remember a couple of months ago, after Trump came into office, he threatened the European Union with a 20% tariff. And then they had some discussions, debates, the Americans and the Europeans. And finally, they agreed on the compromise of 10% tariff. I mean, I find this quite outrageous. So the Europeans basically accepted a 10% tariff, but didn't retaliate in kind. I mean, what does that really tell you about the Europeans' will to power? In my opinion, it is non-existent. So I think the Europeans, especially the Western Europeans and the European Union, while it still has certain influence in global affairs, it is very apparent to me that it is a declining power. And I don't think that any kind of measures will somehow bring about a renaissance of Western Europe. I mean, I always like to use the example of Mongolia. I mean, Mongolia used to be the world's foremost superpower, but now it is not a really important country anymore. I think that in the long term, the same will happen with the European Union. It will just slide more and more into geopolitical irrelevance, because nowadays, I think the real global players, the real poles, are the United States, the Russian Federation, India, and China. And I think if the global South looks at the actions and the speeches of the Western Europeans, in their eyes, the European Union is losing all credibility. I mean, starting with a sanctions regime against Russia. So the European Union sanctioned Russia. I mean, hundreds and thousands of sanctions, but it didn't really have that much of a negative effect on Russia. It had a horrible effect on the economies of the different European countries. But my point is that other countries, especially in, I don't know, the Asia, Africa, South America, they look at the European Union and they will think twice about like putting money in the European Union. Why should we leave our money in the European Union? Because the European Union, they might just steal our money if they disagree with us politically. I mean, they froze Russian assets and they were about to steal the Russian assets, the European Union. They didn't end up stealing the assets, but the fact that they even threatened to do so already sends a very strong signal to the rest of the world, in my opinion. So I think this will further the whole process of de-dollarization, because the United States is pretty much in a similar position with its threats and sanctions on, I know, governments that it disagrees with. So in the new multipolar world, the other countries, they want to decouple themselves from this Western imperialism. And I think the European Union does not have the political weight to somehow resist this change and gain some kind of a power that it used to have in the past. And I don't think that the European Union wants peace at all, because if they wanted peace, if they truly cared about their economy, then they would have not even started this war, or they would have ended it years ago. It makes no sense to me to somehow argue that the Europeans, like, they should care about the economy, they should care about making a good deal with Russia before the Americans come in, so they can, I don't know, invest in the reconstruction of Ukraine. I mean, in my opinion, this is all wishful thinking, because the European Union is basically a woke, globalist, liberal project, and it is the only one left in the world, because I think with the Trump administration coming to power, the United States has left this liberal project, has left global homo, so to speak. So the headquarters of global homo is basically Berlin right now. And I don't think that the European leaders, like when they preach these values or anti-values of, I know, promoting, I know, diversity, homosexuality, transgender, all this stuff, I don't think they're just hollow phrases to them. I think they really believe it. Most of them internalized it. And for them, ideology supersedes everything, even the economy. I mean, the whole green fanaticism is one example. Again, with the European Union, especially Germany, refusing to import Russian energy and shutting down the nuclear power stations at the same time, thereby crippling its economy, simply based on pure ideology, is completely insane. And the European Union, I think, is probably the only entity left in the West that still adheres to the principle, the so-called principle of international law, which in my opinion has never existed. There is no international law, and there never has been, because the whole concept of international law was or the rules-based order, quote unquote, was invented by the West to further its imperialist aims. And I actually find it quite refreshing that the United States now, and Trump especially, openly admits that international law means nothing to them anymore. And they basically do whatever they want. If it furthers their interests, at least it's honest. Right? And instead of complaining about it like the Europeans, I think other powerful states, like true powerful states, like the Russian Federation, India, and China, I think they should look at the example of the United States, and they should also drop the pretense of international law and act accordingly to also get their share of the pie, so to speak, because the new multipolar world is not some hippie version of the multipolar world where everybody in the end will live in peace and we share everything. I think it's a Darwinian multipolarity where might is right and only the most powerful actors will succeed in getting a place at the multipolar table. And I don't think the European Union has the power to even get, I don't know, like a seat at this table at all. Yeah, that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Konstantin. And let's finish, last but not least, Mr. Arthur Pavezzi. Welcome. Obrigado for your assistance from the rising superpower from Brazil. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Enrique. I'm very happy to be here. But I wanted to focus on my lecture here to talk about the industry effects of the sanctions and the possible revival on industry and easing on budget pressures for European countries. As I already mentioned here, the sanctions are costing loads of money to the European countries for multiple reasons, for disrupting trade chains, for making them pay double, triple prices for the same products they once bought directly from Russia, like oil and gas, where they buy it from refineries in India instead of refining it themselves through the gasoducts. And besides it, the military spending, the new military spending in Europe has put tons of additional pressures on their already tight budgets for public spending. And if peace is achieved or if tensions are diminished, this budget could be put somewhere else, like public investments for the crippling European economy. Since after the end of the pandemic, the European economy has not gone back to its previous state. The American economy has grown again, although with lots of controversies for the sources of its growing. But European economy is even more stagnant than after and during the Euro debt crisis in the 2010s. So, and they avoid talking about this problem. They simply try to implement the military keynesianism that the United States have used since after the end of World War II. Besides, as mentioned about the migration problems, the returning of millions of Ukrainian refugees could also help easing costs for welfare, housing, healthcare, and these budgets could be used for the European citizens themselves instead of refugees for in war that that the European people no longer wishes to keep promoting, instead of against their own elites. And the industrial sector, especially in the metallurgy in France and Germany, are lagging behind their American, Chinese, and Asian competitors. And they can't, these companies like Siemens, Alstom, Thales can compete again for contracts in possible reconstructions for affected places. They can also end up having hundred millions or billion-dollar projects for reconstructions for a possible joint Russian and European reconstruction of affected areas in Ukraine. But they don't seem to understand the importance of this, and they keep injecting more money into the war, more money into American weapons, more money into other industries, more money to finance other countries' economies at the cost of their own people, of the cost of their own projects, their own production. That was it. Thank you once again for inviting me here.
Thanks a lot, dear colleagues. But I enjoy a lot, and I think our audience enjoyed a lot your interventions, your speeches. But the time is over. Let's see us in the next meeting with more colleagues growing more and better. So thanks a lot. Obrigado. Grazie mille. Good. Dankeschön. And gracias to everybody who are watching our programs, reading our experts' view, and let's see us in the next program. Thanks a lot. Goodbye.